I mean, this would be fantastic. Within months, there would be some people who would suffer from the adjustment period, but it might be the people who have benefited so much over these years. But the average person, the poor person, the jobs would become available. So it would not take a long, long time. What would take a long time is if we refuse to consider it and the problems get worse and we have a severe recession or depression and huge inflation and we do all the wrong things. That is what we should work so hard against.
We must get rid of the fiat money system. How do you do that? Well, the first step, of course, the big step, the biggest imaginable step, is for people to realize that they even have one. I mean, how many people walking up and down the streets that go into the polls each year and elect their leaders, how many people know that we have a fiat money system? How are we going to change that unless we have an understanding, an educational foundation at the electoral level? So this is where we have to start.
Because so many people in the U.S. are now semi-illiterate, thanks to the government-sponsored public school system, it may be possible to stimulate a discussion on the Federal Reserve only through films and TV shows. In many ways, film has replaced the written word for the masses.
What is the Federal Reserve System?
It's where they generate the money, and they keep the money, I think.
Federal Reserve System is a banking structure owned by the banks and run by the government.
No, I don't know much about this.
Okay, thank you.
It's a system of balancing the flow of currency throughout the United States so that as banks need to have liquidity, they have it, and as they need to tighten up money, they tighten it up.
Similar to what you had said earlier about having the reserves for when we go in a crisis or something, and you need to have that actual backing, not just the dollar currency, because paper is paper, and if you don't have that gold or silver behind it, then it's just going to be paper.
It was established in, if I guessed, I'm not sure, 1913 perhaps, to establish stability in the American financial system.
I don't know the answer to that. Okay. What is the system?
It's a banking system that's run by the government. It's almost like a fourth branch, but it's run by the government, and it's guaranteeing that banks will remain stable. And if they're not stable, they'll take it over.
A way of backing up the money. I don't know. Yeah.
And what is the Federal Reserve System?
Well, do you want Andrew Jackson's opinion of the Federal Reserve System or what?
Your opinion.
I liked his. It's a bunch of organized crooks.
Wow. Now that citizen is informed. Too bad everyone is not as aware of how far we have strayed from our founding principles.
Well, the major problem you have not only with the Federal Reserve System, but with any statutory structure that's unconstitutional, is it doesn't square with what's called the Supremacy Clause. The Constitution, which has the Constitution and laws passed in pursuance thereof, that is, constitutional laws, are the supreme law of the land. So obviously if you have a statute that doesn't square with the Constitution, it's void. It is not a law, in fact. So the question then arises, well, how does that square with the oath of office of representatives, senators, judges? And the answer is it doesn't. That when they come face to face with a statute that is in contradiction of the Constitution, they are to treat the Constitution as the supreme law and treat that statute as void. So that's number one. Here we have a system, the Federal Reserve System, that has all of these constitutional problems, and everyone is essentially looking in the opposite direction. So that doesn't square with the oath of office. And one would think that the president, being the head of the executive department, in which we find the Treasury, Department of Treasury, right, which interacts quite closely with the Federal Reserve, might have something direct to say about that. And then, of course, the president has a specific constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and the supreme law of the land is the Constitution. So you would expect, on top of all of this, that he would be saying, wait a minute, if the Constitution doesn't square with the Federal Reserve Act in one or more ways, then I should be giving directives to the Secretary of the Treasury to take certain kinds of action to deal with that. And of course we see exactly the opposite. we see the Federal Reserve people, usually the chairman of the Federal Reserve, comes to Congress, and he tells Congress directly, and usually tells the president, at least indirectly, here's how monetary policy is going to be implemented. So the Federal Reserve is the tail that's wagging the dog when we have all of these questions that it may not be legitimate at all in whole or in part. If you want to see the way power goes in a system or the way the laws are corrupted, follow the money, and the Federal Reserve is a huge agency for the creation of money.
If you study monetary history throughout thousands of years, you will find out that paper money has been tried many, many times, and it never succeeds. It always ends badly. The question is when will the dollar end badly? Will it be next year or in 5 years or 10 years? I'm convinced it will end unless we do the right things, and that is restore soundness to the money, put restraints on our government, either strictly curtail the power of the Fed or get rid of the Fed. That will be the only way you can save the dollar. But if we continue to do what we're doing now, we will eventually destroy the dollar.
Throughout history, as governments grow, they limit the individual's rights. The same thing happened in the Roman Empire. We know this from history, but we also know it from Shakespeare's wonderful play, Julius Caesar. As we start moving toward a bigger and bigger government, it's going to mean that the individual no longer has the right to own his property, the right to do what he wants, the right to live freely, the right to worship as he wants, the right to speak as he wants. The government starts to tell us what to do. Most of the time they think they're telling us what to do in their best interest, but the trouble is that government, as Adam Smith pointed out, John Locke pointed out, as the great thinkers of all time have always pointed out, don't really know what's right to do. Government often makes the wrong choices because it doesn't understand the consequences of its actions. So even when it doesn't desire to be a nefarious force, to be a dark force, it often is.
The problem that we have is the result of legislation. Congress has to make fundamental changes in the present system. I don't think that it's possible to impose from the top down even the constitutional system, because no one out there now is used to using gold and silver as their money. So what needs to be done is to create a competitive system of currencies. Leave the Federal Reserve System there. Slowly, over 6 months or a year, take away some of its legal privileges. Its legal tender privilege, its privilege as the only medium to pay government taxes, so forth and so on. And over on this side, create a gold and silver system. And then you will have competition between the two, the paper money price structure and the gold and silver price structure. And it will be a competition. What happened is in this competition, gold and silver would win out, because in competition the free market usually wins out over governmental intervention and special privileges. And that's the reason we have governmental intervention and special privileges, to keep the free market from winning out. And that's why they go to government, to ask for legal privileges, all right? So that's the first problem. Now the second problem is I don't see that happening through Congress, because there are just too many loggerheads in Congress to get the thing started. So my suggestion is that it begin in some state, a small state, a state that probably has a certain amount of its taxes that it can hypothecate to gold. And if the system worked and more people were asking, then the state could expand the areas of taxation and bring more people into it. And eventually you would, if it worked, you would see the whole state, the state's monetary system, the government, state government, would be on a gold system. And then I would think as well you'd begin to see that spreading into the economy. Now, if that were to happen, then I think other states would look at this and say, well, that makes sense. Let's begin to move in that direction. You could look at it essentially as a monetary insurance policy. They don't have to go beyond 10%, but 10% gold holding is perfectly prudent. And if something were to happen in the economy, if there were to be a monetary crisis, banking crisis, then the state could rapidly expand the system, because people would know how it operates. But the idea is to get the mechanism, as it were, on the table so that people can see how it works, why it works, what its benefits are. They don't have to be afraid of it. And arguments along the lines of there's not enough gold and silver in the world to do this will, that kind of thing will be shown to be fallacious.
Concerned citizens should be asking themselves questions like, why do you feel like you're on a treadmill that's constantly running faster?